All right. Well, we're a couple minutes after the hour, and it's time to get started. Welcome everybody to Building Communities, a MentorCore event, a fireside chat with Scott Pond. I'm Dan Ayala. It's Lisa Beth Lentini Walker, and the gentleman here on the yellow wall is Scott Pond. I've had the pleasure of knowing Scott probably for 10 years now. Um, and Scott was part of building a community around chief information security officers in Chicagoland. And one of the things that was really interesting to me was how Scott was able to help people come together, people who did and didn't know each other, and help them communicate. And that's one of the things we wanted to talk about today. So welcome, Scott. We're really glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And Scott,
Nice
where are you calling in from? Where's your current physical location?
Okay, so the town is called Chatikulu, and if that doesn't sound like a town,
is that the usual spelling?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, most people call it Jatsi. I'm on a mountaintop in southern Eswatini, which most people remember as Swaziland.
Wonderful. So, and for those that don't know that Swaziland, it is in the southern part of Africa. So it's quite a few hours later for Scott, and we're just really glad you're here with us. Scott, you originally come from Portland, though, right?
Yeah, Portland, Oregon, nice green Pacific Northwest, and very far from home right now. But actually, this is home, so I don't know what I'm talking about.
Nice. Well, tell us a little bit about how you got there. What's your origin story?
Whoa. I mean, how long do you got? So anyway, let's just go back to coffee shop. So and some of this is actually in some of my idea or what I learned about like building community. I worked in a coffee shop, and I loved it. So I loved that kind of work, and it was like a young company. Like they really liked have a really positive interactive feeling. It was mostly drive-through coffee, so it wasn't sit down. So it was fast. It was play your own music. I was the manager of this shop in Portland, and it was all about the customer and making a good product very quickly and having a really good relationship with your customers. And so I was making coffee for for several years. I was managing the shop and a lot of great customers, and didn't realize that one of my customers would like me enough to offer me a job in a totally different world. So I was apparently making coffee for the CEO of a cybersecurity. He was doing CIO events primarily, but he wanted to start doing cybersecurity events, and he liked his morning barista. Which surprised me. I didn't really know why he would think specifically of me for cybersecurity, but he offered me a job, brought me in, it worked perfectly. I came with no experience. I think if I went to apply for that job, like I didn't on paper, they wouldn't probably have seen me. But it worked out because I could apply all the things I learned from the coffee shop into building CISO communities. Although I had no clue what a CISO was. I knew there was a CEO, maybe a CFO, right? At that time, we're going origin story, right? So but anyway, I was pulled into cybersecurity from making coffee for the right person.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. So, a lot of people are trying to get into different elements of compliance or risk or cybersecurity. What did you bring to the table at that time that was valued so much? I mean, it sounds like you were very customer oriented and adaptable and liked to be able to self-start. What else did you bring to the table?
I think that was most of it. I mean, I care about people. I mean, most of the things that I brought to the table, were my family values and my spiritual values that I was raised with, and I just took that everywhere I went with me, right? So, I mean, to me, people were important. People, and you cared about other people. You showed interest, right? So I showed genuine interest. It wasn't like, the fake like car salesman dude. Okay, so there's great car salesmen. Let's not bash those guys. But,
the stereotype of car salesman.
So I just cared about people, and I tried to be genuine. it wasn't like some strategy. It was all I knew anyway. And I liked all my customers. One of them just happened to offer me a job exactly when I needed one. So I think that aspect, I mean, you can teach someone like the values of caring and showing that you care and like the soft skills, but I think those are a little more tricky to teach than like I had never used Excel before I had this job. Never had a desk job, before this, and you can teach that, right? You can show someone how to use Excel and how to sit at a desk and make sales calls, but like he was looking more specifically for soft skills and hard to teach like a genuine nature. It's possible, but
Oh, you're totally right. There's been a long-standing leadership discussion about how can you teach empathy? How can you teach leaders to be empathetic? How can you teach anybody to be empathetic for that matter? But I think it's especially endemic in leaders who don't necessarily put themselves in the shoes of the people either they're dealing with in business or the people that work for them or their customers, and that becomes a hampering factor. So it sounds like that was that was definitely something that you had that aided you along the way, and then you can layer on the hard skills.
Yeah, I figured out how to get those, how to get the office suite into my brain.
And not having any prior experience with CISOs, how was it trying to learn what I think of as a new language to be able to connect with them?
Yeah, no, Dan's speaking it right now for those who couldn't translate. I didn't even know the role existed. I knew nothing about cybersecurity, and I came in, and I was there for a few days. I got some training, and they told me I would be. There was only, I mean, they had a huge business with CIO summits and HR summits and CFO, and this was a new thing for them. And so, I mean, throw it on the new guy because, hey, let's see what happens. There's not a big loss, right?
Right.
But the CISO, I think what worked for me is I didn't try too hard to speak the language. Like, I didn't try to be a CISO. I tried to learn everything I could. I listened, but I think my approach at that time, 10 years ago, I mean, you had really savvy salespeople that had been in the business for a long time, 30-year salespeople, technology salespeople even. And some were like, when I saw how green you were, I thought you were going nowhere. But I think that's what worked because to me, people are people, right? It doesn't matter if you're buying a mocha or you're trying to secure your perimeter, like you're a human. So I basically took everything I learned about like dealing with customers at a coffee shop, and I applied that straight to the way I dealt with CISOs, which, yeah, my my cube mates next to me may have cringed. I was really casual. It was like, okay, the coffee shop was called Dutch Bros. So I was like, hey, what's up? Hey guys, what's up, bro? Like a lot of that. And some of that came out when I'm calling, multi-billion-dollar company CISOs. And to me, like, it wasn't a strategy. It was all I knew. And
it was genuine.
Yeah, that authentic
through.
kind of voice that you have, as opposed to trying to be something that you're not.
Yeah.
So, exactly. So instead of trying to sound like them or even to take on their tone, I never changed like my tone, and it kind of was an accident because I didn't know better, but I guess it worked.
Oh, it did. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think Lisa's point that authenticity shows through in people when they're being their genuine selves. And more so as people are now exposed, as we're able to communicate with more people through different mediums like this and spend more time speaking, I think that people get it's a little easier to see through some of the facades that have been in place over time, and get through to genuineness a lot easier. Well, tell me a little bit about when you engage somebody for the first time, when you're about to talk to them for the first time. How do you set up things to be able to tell your story, to be able to get them to want to talk to you? This is a world in which you've done a lot in sales and selling to security professionals, and I'll argue that the same challenge exists across compliance and risk and privacy and ethics as it does in security, in that these are topic areas where the sales are hard. It's a hard sales approach, has historically been. There's a lot of antagonism between those that are selling and those that are buying. And how do you start to establish a rapport to be able to build a relationship?
Yeah, I mean, even just going even to the first conversation, like how do you tell your story for the first time? I mean, it's just an interesting thing to think about. Like, I mean, for me, it's comes down to like two categories, which is not overthinking it and then not overdoing it. I think those two, looking back, were probably the most important. So not overthinking it, we've kind of already touched on like the overthinking it approach, like the coffee shop approach. You know, when you go buy coffee, if you're a customer or a barista, when you go buy coffee, do you like, man, like, how do I get across? Like, are you strategizing on like who you are and how you express that to like your coffee guy?
You mean
Or
I'm not supposed to?
no, I mean, it sounds cool, like, but no, right. But you know, you don't like, and, or if you're like getting coffee with like your coworker, you're not walking in there like, how do I tell him
And I
about who
really
I
like a mocha rather than,
Well,
than a
I'll argue,
latte.
I'll argue if I
am?
want the cup of what is effectively just liquid chocolate, and I don't want to feel guilty, I'm going to need to sell the guy that I'm walking in with so that he or she has one too. And then I don't feel like I'm just sitting there drinking a cup of chocolate alone. It's a
That's
bit of a
community.
stretch. Your point's really
That's
well
a
made, Scott.
that's a mocha
Yeah,
community.
yeah. Well, it's interesting. You don't strategize. You just do. You do
Right.
you.
And people sense when like the way you're talking is a strategy. Like they can hear it. Like why? And so it's weird the tell your story thing. It's if it's not coming out natural. I mean, all of us. I mean, okay, not everyone's like extroverted and can just blurt out everything about them with ease. I mean, we do have to work on it to an extent, right? But you don't go to like your friends or your grandmas or you know the kitchen at the office and think like, how can I engage my coworkers? Who you are comes out naturally, right? And if it's not coming out naturally, maybe you just get to know yourself better. So who you are comes out a little more naturally. So okay, I told you guys I emceed a wedding today on Zoom, and this wedding on the not overthinking it. Just like a customer and a barista have common ground, no pun intended. Wedding attendees at this wedding were from, I think there were about 7 countries of people attending on Zoom for these, you know, the bride from Namibia and the groom from Oregon in Swaziland on Zoom. It just blows my mind, the world we live in. But their story, we got to talking and people started introducing themselves to each other because the families didn't know each other. We can't travel. And all their stories were different. But the common ground, the mutual interest was clear. They all cared about the couple, very much so. So it didn't matter like what their primary language was or what border they were behind. The common interest made it so they could naturally, very easily talk about who they were. So like, don't overthink it. If you have common ground, like the other stuff should be able to come out, you know, naturally. And then the second half of that is not overdoing it. We've talked about rambling, Dan. So it's like, okay, not overdoing it. So my story is pretty easy. It's like I was a barista. I love talking about being a musician. You know, I talk about my gingerness a lot. And I live in Africa. Like those are, you know, those are some of the key things that make up my story. But I'm also not going to just barf it onto somebody and talk about like cybersecurity in Africa and music. And I mean, if they want to, let's great. Like I'll talk about all of it in one phone call. But like overdoing it, the negative of overdoing it is like you miss their story, right? So don't overthink and don't overdo because then you're gonna miss their story. Because like, I mean, hearing someone's story is just as important as telling your story. Like, how can you tell your story if you haven't even listened? So a natural interchange, if we're talking about community, an interchange should it should be an interchange, just that. And a natural interchange is like key to community.
That's great advice. Really great advice. One of the is now let's take from that and turn it to you've introduced, you've met, you've built a relationship with somebody. And now part of what you're trying to do as well is to have people build relationships with each other. You're not a direct participant in that relationship building. You're a facilitator, but not a direct participant. Um, how do you get those two participants on board with the idea of becoming part of a relationship, a network, getting to know each other? Like, see, how do you help seed it and then walk away at the right time and let it grow?
I like that. I also was a gardener before I did hobby.
Maybe it's easier to
Um,
talk about the things you aren't awesome at. Oh, wait, we're done. That's all.
um,
Um,
no, okay, so like it just comes back to keeping it simple, like not overdoing it. Again, like what we just talked about, like the common grounds, which relates into mutual benefit. So a community, what is a community? Like if you think about a neighborhood or just life, but your neighborhood, a good community with your neighborhood has a mutual benefit for the people that live in that neighborhood, like safety and trust. Um, there's a lot of benefits to that, right? So you can see a mutual benefit to being a part of a good community in your neighborhood. That's just a common thing in life. So, you know, it's like, don't overthink it. Just make a connection to that. Like a community is always a mutual benefit. And so making a connection from like, you know, the fact that that's true in life to career, you know, finding that mutual benefit, like when you're trying to put these together. I was trying to think back, you know, because the community I work with now, people like you, Dan, I worked with for like 10 years, but I think back the beginning, like in 10 years ago, I don't think CISO conferences, cybersecurity conferences weren't like overblown and it wasn't such a saturated market. I was trying to figure this out. And, you know, when we talked about doing this, and you know, I was thinking about the fact that like 10 years ago, it wasn't super easy, or it wasn't really easy to identify very specifically who or what the CISO was. I remember working on Chicago. It was like there's like 20 or 30 different titles of the community we put together. There was not like two titles or one. It wasn't like CISO or Director of IT Security. It was everything in between. So, you know, what was the mutual benefit there of them coming together? You know, thinking about like, I think we really were working on the recognition of the role, or clearly identifying the role, the recognition of the role, you know, like really building the role of the CISO so people could actually recognize who they are and what they do. At that time, 10 years ago, seemed like the glue. And so then put together the glue or the mutual benefit. Like even if you already had the CISO title 10 years ago, did you not benefit from promoting the role of CISO for people who didn't?
of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it was pretty easy. Like that's the thing I learned. Like the route I got to here is just like not overthinking the connection between like putting something together from the real world to cybersecurity even.
Neat. How do you keep it going? Yeah, how do you keep we get momentum going down the hill and then we get to the bottom, but have to keep this thing going? Um,
Is it constant effort? Is it,
yeah.
you know, in spurts? Is it something where, you know, you have to set some rules of engagement, or is it easier than that?
Uh, constant effort.
You're like a
Because
duck on the water, just paddling furiously, although it looks
yeah,
very smooth, right?
yeah, or you're hurting cats and that never looks smooth.
That's actually part of my title, professional cat
Yeah.
herder.
Okay, cool. I it's constant work because like yeah, I mean again it comes back to the simplified version of it. I mean, of course, there are many complications to community, but really you break it down like the need to be in a community, does that ever go away? I'm
I think
asking
it
you.
depends on who
You're
you are,
asking me.
though. I think for me, the answer is no, it never goes away. Being part of communities is who I am, sharing and giving and learning from others. It's core to my being. I'll go out on a limb and say Lisa Beth is in the same place.
You know me well.
Uh, but that's not everyone. But it doesn't mean that people don't get the same value and benefit out of it. It just may not be as innate to them.
Absolutely.
Maybe they're more introverted. Maybe the interaction style scares them, or it's not natural to them. Maybe they don't have as good of communication skills. I mean, there's a ton of reasons why it doesn't automatically fuel. Any thoughts on how you overcome those, or how you manage those, or manage through them, or help them manage through those?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you do have people that don't, that are more introverted. That's always true. But the overall truth is that community, a spiritual community, is a benefit for those people in that community, the neighborhood community, a physical location community, a family community, a peer community. There, you can always find a benefit. Of course, if I know your podcast, back, you could dig that apart, right? You could obviously dig that apart and say, like, there are communities that can probably have a negative impact. But overall, the principle of a community is a beneficial one in life. So, I mean, just when has someone ever hit like some apex and was too good for the support of a community? Like, and how long do you stay at that point where you think you're there?
Well,
Because the problem,
there's are they, or do they think they are?
and that's the problem. So that's the problem. So, I mean, I think most people realize that they're not at some apex that they're just going to stay at. Right. So I think the second you help people realize, the second you think you don't need the help of your colleagues or your peers, that's when you're going to have a problem. Pride before a fall is a principle that applies in the situation. So, I mean, you are never like at some plateau where you're too good for the support of a community. And community is interesting because, some might think like, maybe you're in a position of abundance, or maybe you're in a position of need. Community is built for both, right? Because sometimes you're one and sometimes you're the other, and it flips. So like, it doesn't matter if you're doing like the best you've ever done, and it doesn't matter if like you need the community because you're not doing so well. You're gonna be in both positions. So that it doesn't matter if you're doing amazing. It doesn't matter if you're a little low. The need for community won't change. So like, just trying to help people recognize that need, that maybe you don't see it now, but we need you. And then someday you may also need, your peers.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that there's a place for everybody within community, in a well built and maintained community. And what I'm hearing from you is it is work. I mean, it's like having a garden. You still have to weed. You still have to make sure that there's, that community is being fed and maintained. It's not like a set it and completely forget it, because otherwise you do have bad things that would creep in, and people, with the loudest voices taking over, as opposed to having that space for everyone.
Or a sense of negativity, or pessimism. And I guess, how do you deal, those are something you really actively have to, I don't know, is combat the right word? You have to manage, you have to address. Any thoughts on those specifically? This is a question that was posed in the Q&A panel, which, by the way, others, if you're listening and care to put in questions, please feel free. We'd love to address them.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, that need to keep the tone, or like the negativity, or the people that can overrun it like weeds. Yeah, gardening is a great way to look at a community. It starts with the gardener, right? I mean, so if, like, for me, like, I'm not just part of like the CISO community, but I have to take an active lead, because I have to rally the troops to, for activities and roundtables and building boards and getting their opinions and trying to provide value in return. So I'm kind of like the gardener, but it's the same for all of us. You know, keeping the negative out starts with me. So the way I talk about my community, or and not even just to them or to like you, Dan, if I was talking to you about one of the other board members or the CISOs I work with, you know, at my home with my wife, if I'm talking about like in a negative sense about some of the ones in that community, is going to come across. I think it starts with, you know, it starts with you, and the way that you talk, even in private, affects the way that you think, right? And you take on that negative feeling that when you start talking negatively about members of your community, and then it will come across in your tone. And then when presented with the opportunity to jump in on like negative talk, you've set yourself up to jump right in. As opposed to, I can think of several examples where some in the community have something to say about specific CISOs, and I get it, but I look at them in a different way. I see their value, and I try to look specifically for their value. And when that talk comes up, I don't jump on the train. And I think, even though I think just that alone is like pulling small weeds, because the people that maybe brought it up in the community noticed my reaction, and then we're like, and then because I try to combat that by saying, well, he's been supportive of me for 10 years. I'm not talking about Dan. No one says anything bad about Dan.
You mean when everybody's talking about Dan? Got it.
Including the problem child. I know.
But
no,
you know
but
what I'm saying? Like,
I think that's really important, whether it's a community or a team that you're on, whether it's your family or it's your friend group or whatever. I mean, that when you have your mind going down the path of negativity, even when you stop what you were previously saying because you're in a different group, your mind's still there, and it does come out in your tone, and it leads you into bad places. I know that, you know, a lot of people struggle with thinking that somebody's thinking something bad about them, right? They're worried that they're not being perceived well. A lot of that is self-talk, and that self-talk, whether it's about other people or about yourself, really does come through.
We're talking about Dan again, right?
Yep. We never left that topic.
Yeah. No,
I'm good. I'm great. I'm wonderful. I'm good. I'm great. I'm wonderful.
Doggone it, people like me.
Yes.
So yeah, one of the things that in our time knowing each other, Scott, is we come together as a community because of a topic that binds us. But one of the things you do really well is you ensure that we extend that conversation, that the discussions go beyond just security. And I'm not talking about wandering into the very far realm of privacy or, you know, moving over to ethics. You force and you ensure that the conversation is not monosyllabic. It's not monotopical. That we're going out and talking about other things. Why do you do that? What are the benefits to doing that? And how do you go about making sure that we can all, you know, keep conversations beyond just the thing that we're there to talk about?
The why has several, I think, a few answers. I think the why has been mentioned. Cybersecurity. I mean, what I do, building cybersecurity communities, that's a saturated market. And so for one, think about it, like if we don't go beyond the glue, and we don't get a little bit wider than the glue, then you can get that everywhere. Like, why do you need to be a part of the community I've built to get, I mean, you can go anywhere for that. So that applies to any sector, like compliance and privacy and cybersecurity, like audit, whatever. Like, you can go so many places for this. But, you know, so to not get lost in a saturated market, why not go a little bit beyond that? And the way that we typically, like Dan, we've been a part of these conversations, and we're taking it a little bit further. The human element is much more interesting to me. So like anytime I could, you know, so then I guess the why also comes to, you know, vanilla versus triple caramel. I mean, vanilla is good. Like, I know I'm not arguing, you know, and I'm not saying you're bad for liking vanilla. Maybe it's your favorite. Man, triple caramel, like, come on. So if that makes sense, it's like, for me, if I want to keep enjoying this job, it's got to be interesting conversation. Obviously, it's got to be in the realm of the people that the community that I work with, which is CISO. So it's still got to be interesting there. But I also like want to enjoy it. And I think anytime we can bring that human element in, I was really happy when we started talking a little bit more about the well-being aspect, the burnout, like bringing those things in is much more intriguing to me than some of the technical stuff. But I think leadership, technical, or leadership and the human aspect of cybersecurity conversations is more interesting. So I guess maybe it's selfish, but also I think it improves the community more when you bring the human elements in and go a little bit wider.
Well, it's
So
also indicative of the fact that we as an industry, and again, this applies across not just in security, but privacy, risk, ethics, compliance. We've moved out of heads down mode as an industry where we're looking down at at just the rules, at just the regulations, at just the requirements, and now starting to look up and around as leaders in these areas as to how does this benefit the business, how does this work with society, and that breadth is important to being able to do that as these roles and these functions are increasingly weaved into the fabric of the businesses or the organizations that we're serving. So having that in all of the different interactions helps us as leaders. It's necessary to be a leader in this field in the modern era.
yeah.
Well, and I think, again, that's another area of common grounds, right? We are all human. And one of the things that, Dan and I have talked about a lot and that we see across the board in anyone who's playing this kind of guardian role is there's tremendous burnout. There's a big sense of isolation. You're often in a position where you have to be the adult in the room and saying, no, we're really not going to do that because of X, Y, and Z. And you're disappointing people, often sales or executives who just don't want any problems, right? So it's a unique experience to have those conversations. And sometimes they're conversations about people who are doing really bad things and maybe losing their jobs because they've done really bad things. So there's a heavy load on the people in this profession, and making sure that you're talking about what they need as human beings rather than just as human doings is important too.
Yeah, and the increasing acceptance of the fact that it's okay to not be okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is in you. I think Scott, you and I have talked about this topic, and I know Lisa Beth and I have, and many others. In fact, not many discussions come up with practitioners or leaders in any of these fields in which we don't get to the, the mental health component or just the personal health component of it all. And then you realize that it's okay to not be okay, and we're going through things together. And the more we can help each other on that path is, really important and humanizes a lot of what we do.
Absolutely agree with all of that. I was just thinking of, I mean, your MentorCore, the person that plucked me out of the coffee shop and brought me into cybersecurity. He had a lot of sayings. He had a lot of motivating sayings. He just walked around the office with them all day, but he constantly talked about asking for help, and that runs contrary to what a lot of people had been for a long time, and that really had an effect on me. Like, I mean, okay, obviously, if you're in trouble, ask for help. But for like anything, like, you know why you ask for help? Because people, when you ask for help, people want to help, and that's a huge part of community, and that's important for you to like stay feeling safe and like ask for help. Like, why are so many people thinking that they must be above asking for help?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily, well, there are some that, yes, but I think in large part though, there's this can-do culture that is, if you ask for help, well, there's both competitive culture and can-do culture, that if you're asking for help, it means you're admitting that you don't already know it. Someone else in a competitive culture could take advantage of that, and you never want to show your weaknesses.
Never let them see you sweat.
Exactly.
Oh,
And that culture has been pervasive. It was very 1980s, 1990s culture. I think we're moving away from that in a lot of ways, although there are definitely parts that there is still that. But in this profession, in this realm of professions, where it's much more about collaboration and it's much more about sharing and information for a common success, a common societal success, um, as well as for our own organizations, that I think it's really enabled us to ask those questions, to ask for help a little bit easier.
Right.
But
I
asking
think
for help.
vulnerability is not seen as much as a weakness anymore. It's more of a self-awareness item when you can use assistance, and the collaboration, I think, is changing so much.
Except if you get a vulnerability report from your information security team, then it means you should patch it right away. Thank you.
That's right. Yes. Okay. Thanks for the PSA on that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's to your point, right? Asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of self-assuredness and the ability to identify areas where you could use assistance or where teamwork might be better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually, in a lot of cases, it's harder to ask for help than to pretend. And so it actually shows strength to be okay with asking or showing vulnerability.
Yeah.
Makes you human.
Although there are those that would argue that that's not a trait that they wish to achieve.
Yeah, humanity is really challenging.
We built the community. We've maintained a community. We've culled the community and weeded it and made sure that it stayed true to form. But when you take a step back and you look at that community and the people within it, are there any success stories, any things, any tales you want to tell, names not required, of just how you've watched people grow as a part of being in those communities?
Okay, so, and if we go back 10 years,
names not desired. How about that?
we'll call this person Danny. Danny Ayanda.
No relation.
No. Totally no relation. Okay, so going back about 10 years, I would say the general feel of like cybersecurity professionals was more technical and less business savvy, and less recognition of the role. Like either like they're kind of like put in this weird place in their function of the company, or they weren't, like they felt maybe disrespected by the title, and maybe like they felt a little more like a help desk nerd. But I think that feeling was overwhelming them because it was also showing a little bit like they stayed technical. It didn't, and not as, okay, there were obviously there have been business savvy CISOs forever, but it wasn't so common 10 years ago. It's been cool to watch the communities I work with. You see like the language of the business change among people that maybe were more technical before. You see like them taking on speaking roles, them taking on like new companies, organizations, and industries where you might not have seen them going before. I think of, I'll leave names and companies out, but I think of one of the guys I very first worked with in Chicago 10 years ago on the first event, very like introverted. And I mean, he was at a great company. He was in a really good position at that company. And I just watched him like make connections, and through those connections, through the community, he ended up at like a global, 5 brand is like a chief something or other. We'll leave out. I don't know how you can identify people these days. But just watching people like go from, like take on that, not just the business savvy nature of it, it's like the confidence, like seeing the confidence of the CISO community grow in 10 years. Like, I don't take credit for that, but just being there for it to provide like a room for them to talk and have it happen. Because it would have happened if they went in the room with other people. But watching that growth and that confidence in the CISO community in 10 years, it's been really cool to watch.
Nice. If you had to tell me of 10 years ago, or our counterparts of 10 years ago, something you've learned now that would help us get more out of the use of these communities, what would it be?
I had to tell Danny Ayanda,
yeah. or any of us, if you could now go back and say, this is something you could have done to get even more out of the opportunities of having communities like this, what would it be, and how can we help the people that are starting out today? and you help them get even more out of it than we did as we were starting out in this world.
Because I know that there's a lot of people who are thinking about transitions into either compliance or risk or information security, and they're new. Maybe they're transitioning out from another field. Right? Any ideas or tips about how to best maximize what's available or find, those communities?
Well, okay, so how if you're a part of one, if I went back 10 years and looked at anybody that was a part of it, something that developed over time that I saw that differentiated those who grew from based on the community and those who maybe like kind of stayed maybe a little stagnant. I mean, they're still doing fine, but the ones that really grew, they saw what they had as and they utilized it. Like you don't benefit if you don't use it, so be involved. Like you're only going to benefit as much as you get involved in the community. So um, I mean, I think I don't know what I talked Dan into a speaking session, 10 years ago or something. But like, I'm sure Dan was able to see just by getting involved in that type of program and that type of audience, like some benefit from stepping into what I don't know, maybe a little bit of a beyond what he normally would have done at that time. But you're only going to get something out of a community if you actually are involved. And I try to tell the community I work with all the time, like, like view yourself as like, okay, this isn't how overall is, but I'm like, it's kind of like you're my boss, and I'll or no, yeah, and I'll do anything. Like if you want something out of this community, ask me, and I can put it together. I've told Dan the same thing. We actually ended up trying something. We tried a morning CISO talk that didn't exist before. And now we get like 6 to 9 people talking about subjects that we don't talk about at conferences. For 30 minutes, just a 30-minute call in the morning. We tried it because we had an open conversation and he utilized, his community. So if you can instill into someone, especially if you're like the one kind of trying to take the lead in the community, like, let me know what you need and then I can help you. But if you're just along for the ride, the benefit's going to be minimal. But if you're one of those active members, you're going to get as much back out of the community as you put into it. So don't just go along for the ride just to like network sometimes, but use it, get involved with it, ask for things, and then also, make deposits so you can make withdrawals, right? About that, man. So
Banking.
yeah, let's not talk about banking.
And Scott, just to let you know what I learned from that first time, and by the way, that was my first time on stage in front of presenting in front of a large group of people I wasn't working with directly. The thing I learned most, one was rehearse and don't tear your entire deck apart the night before. But it was also that that the surest way to get the final approval from public affairs to use a deck is to say, I'm going on stage in 5 minutes. And you still haven't approved this. But no, I think your points are really good. The idea of getting out of it what you put into it, and using the resources that are available to help make it what you want it to be and what you need it to be.
Well, and what I heard, in addition to what you said, was being really intentional, right? This isn't something where you're just going to kind of float by and get the most out of it. You actually have to be thoughtful and proactive in saying, I'm going to really engage, and I'm going to engage in this way. And this is what I'm going to do to volunteer and what I want to see for the future of this community. Because ultimately, communities come together and they stick together because people put effort in.
Absolutely.
That is like looking at Dan and me still hanging out like 10 years later, like Dan put effort in, like he did something he hadn't done before for the community we were building 10 years ago. And the people that came, so, I was out of the cybersecurity game for a couple of years. And when I came back, the people that put effort were the same people that were there greeting me and like, let's do this again very quickly. So the effort gives community longevity and strength. But
And
like
you might
sometimes,
actually make some really good friends along the way too.
Every
well,
once in a while.
why not? But like it blows my mind sometimes because like I think about what I'm trying to provide. Like I will literally, we put together collaborative sessions for CISOs and people, actually privacy officers, whoever, right? So we actually, anyone that touches cybersecurity, and I constantly say, you tell me what you want to talk about at an interactive roundtable. We'll get the people there. You give me the subjects, I'll build it. Like I'll do all the work. All you literally have to like just your words. Just give me your words and an idea, and we'll put it together. And how many don't take as much of advantage of like, like think about something you've been struggling with, and I will literally put together a roundtable for them. And the ones that do ask versus how many actually don't take up that opportunity. So that's just an opportunity missed to have a whole group put together, or just a discussion that would benefit the things that you're dealing with. But get involved.
All right, Scott, we're coming near the end of the end of our allotted time, and I'm going to give you the question that we ask everybody who comes through MentorCore. This is my first time actually getting to ask it because Lisa Beth always
I've
asks.
hogged it all.
So I will ask it. So, what is the best thing you've learned from a mentor you've had?
So I would go back to the same person that pulled me into cybersecurity, just loaded with like gems of motivational things. You could say them all day long, but the cool thing was he believed them. But two of them that I wrote down when I saw that you were going to ask this was, he would always say, "Together we can." And it's like it's not new. He's not like, it's not mind blowing, but just saying it in that way, and then or just saying it to remember, that should be like the mantra of community builders, right? Together we can. And believing in the power of what a group of people can do is going to give you the strength to do it if you actually understand what you have when you have a really good community. So I really loved that. And then a bonus one, he would which we've covered, he would say, when you give, you get. So that's obviously, you put something in, then you can't just take, but you have to put something in.
Did you take that from the poster for next week's talk with Douglas
It was
Brush?
a beautiful
It's called
segue.
Give
I
to
mean,
Get.
I have no idea what you guys are doing in 1 or 2 weeks.
Next week, same bat time, same bat channel. Douglas Brush is who we've talked about how to build your own companies, build your own security company. He's going to be on, and we're going to talk about giving in order to get. So great segue. Lisa, any questions, or anyone that's on the live stream? If you're watching this live, put some final questions into the Q&A panel, and we can pose them to Scott. And I'll let Lisa, if she has any now.
well, so thank you so much for coming on today and talking to us. I'm still completely amazed every time I talk to you. I find out something new that I didn't know. And I'm amazed that you're doing a lot of this legwork from a completely different time zone. So one of the questions that I have, which isn't even necessarily related to community, but maybe is a little bit, is as we've morphed into a far more virtual community, what's the same and what's different about how you're working today and how we need to build communities virtually that hopefully one day will be in person again?
Yeah, man, good question. So I don't, there's nothing like physically being together to solidify a community. My first event back, I enjoyed like getting back on the phone, like when I came back, a year and a half ago, at some point. But we were building physical events together. I remember when I first got back in touch with Dan after being out for a couple of years, and it was exciting to be on the phone. But the best part was we built something, and we in Chicago, and we got there, and this thing that we talked about on the phone, and we strategized and put all the pieces together, and then it was there. We made something, and then being there and experiencing what you as a community build, I don't think you can't really replace it. That's the ultimate. But we have to try. I mean, I think physical will come back. I learned something today on, it's just like community. It is what you make of it. If you sit here and that's all you think about is it was better in person, it's kind of like the gardening thing, you know, like pulling out those, take out that negative thought, because you're never going to like it if you always think that. Even if it's completely true, if every time I get on like my round table and I'm like, man, I wish I was at the city winery and, you know, at a physical table, like I will always want that, and that will always be better. And even if it's true, like I'm taking some of my own joy away from the way that I have the privilege to earn a living for my family right now, right? So, like, why? So I think the best thing that we can do is look at what's going on in the world and not think like the moving forward part is looking at the good of what we have as opposed to looking at the bad of what we don't, and that will change your feeling of it. That will change the way you talk about it. I mean, I've been on Zoom calls after emceeing for a few hours. You know, the computer can be tiring, but it was awesome, and I'm glad to do it again because I can, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I can't. Yeah, I'm how many time zones away from you? I'm 6 time zones away from you guys, you know, at the bottom of the globe, and we can do this. So it's not a negative. We have to look at the things that we appreciate for the privilege to be able to still, for those who can work, that we can still work.
Love it. Scott, it gives me no greater pleasure to welcome you to our community from being the person who helped me understand what a sense of community was. I just really appreciate your being here. And thank you for sharing these great insights. We're very excited to get to have you on from that part of the world.
It was fun. It was nice to be with both. Like I said, the last time we were together was at my last physical event, and it's great to try this new route with you guys. No, you guys are doing cool stuff, and I'm always happy to support you with whatever you do because you guys always support me. So that's what community does, man.
Sounds good. Scott, thank you so much. Appreciate all your time. To everybody who was able to join us live, thank you as well. We really appreciate you being here, and we'll see you all again soon.